Members, we now come to the clauses, and the question is that clauses 1 and 2 stand part. Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to make a short contribution in this part of the bill because clauses 1 and 2 have been controversial, particularly clause 2. That's obviously the commencement date for this bill. For those who may only just be tuning in to this debate, we're actually debating a policy that was announced at the last budget, so some months ago now, and we're debating a commencement date for this piece of legislation that means that this benefit increase will not kick in for those who are in the most significant hardship until April of 2016. Now, obviously, the point of contention for this side of the House has been that, yes, we support an increase in benefit rates for those in hardship, absolutely. Our argument has been around the adequacy and perhaps the way that that increase has been designed. But what is no question for us is that the need was immediate. The need was immediate. In fact, it's been in place for some time now. And again, I have to come back to this because it's been raised continually, Mr. Chair, in this House. It's been lauded as the first benefit increase in 40 years. That is not correct. Working for Families increased benefit rates when they were introduced under the last Labor government via the family tax credit. What was that, John O'Naylor? But am I getting a concession from the government yet that benefit rates were increased? Because the one thing that I will add as a caveat to that is that we always said, and this was said first by Annette King when she was the first spokesperson in this area, we had unfinished business. No one on this side of the House is claiming that Working for Families was the beginning and the end of everything that we had to say on poverty and inequality issues in this country. It wasn't. But it was a damn good start, and it was a necessary start, and a concession that it was a necessary start by the fact that the government has not repealed it. In fact, they continue to play with elements of it in this bill. But our contention, Mr. Chair, has been that when it comes to Clause 2, we needed it right away. We needed it absolutely right away. In fact, as we've always argued in debating this bill, if you are really genuinely looking at hardship, then you would look at some of the real catalysts for that hardship. And since Working for Families was implemented, one of the massive contributing factors to that growth in hardship, if you look at the income measures around median income and the before and after housing costs, it tells you exactly what some of the problem is. And some of that problem are the after housing costs. Because, of course, in our most populated city in the country and in the South Island and Christchurch, we have had a significant increase in housing costs. That's taken a disproportionate amount of income out of those low-income families, trying to put a roof over their head. That has exacerbated the issue of income inadequacy. So that is a contributing factor. And the reason that I raise that is because Working for Families obviously was dealing with income inadequacy across the board, but that has been exacerbated by an increase in housing costs. And that is now a new challenge that we need to continue to address. So these things are never static, they're dynamic, and we need to keep addressing them, Mr. Chair. But what is not dynamic is simply the fact that the need exists and we need to do something about it with immediate attention, and that's why we have a problem with this commencement date. It should not have been delayed. And as has been raised in the debate as well, Mr. Chair, the idea that the CPI adjustment will kick in first, then the base increase, and the base increase of $25 won't be CPI adjusted? Well, that seems unfair. We're waiting for a year for it to be introduced. Why not CPI adjusted at the same time? Speaking briefly to then the title clause, Mr. Chair, this is the Support for Children in Hardship Bill. What undermines the notion of support for children is that actually income is one thing, parental support is another. Fundamental to a child's well-being and their success in life is the support and attachment they have to their caregivers. We're increasingly becoming aware of the impact and the importance of that relationship between a child and their caregiver. It's known as attachment. It's also known as attachment disorder when it's a poor relationship. And the flow-on effects of that, Mr. Chair.
Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you. The flow-on effects of a poor relationship in that regard is costly to us as taxpayers. It may seem like it's just a relational issue, but actually when it comes to things like conduct disorder, behavioural issues that we as a taxpayer end up putting money into from a remedial perspective, we all end up paying for a poor bond between a child and a caregiver. And I use the word caregiver loosely because we do know that it's not specific on who that individual needs to be. It just needs to be a trusting relationship and a consistent relationship with a child and an adult at a very young age. And in fact, it's been estimated, I think it was potentially David Ferguson that estimated that the cost of a poor attachment and potentially later on conduct disorder generally can be up to $1 million per child. So it pays to invest early. So that idea of support is not just monetary, it is about that physical connection and presence with a caregiver. But what this bill does is it gives with the one hand on the income side and it takes away with the other, in the sense that we're now putting in a requirement for that potentially single caregiver to be in work at a younger age for that child. And what we don't seem to factor in is the detriment and the undoing of any positive effect we might have with that income boost, with the negative impact of that change in threshold. So the use of the word support does need to be taken more broadly. And as a Labour Party, we've always talked about income inadequacy as one issue when it comes to the deprivation that children in poverty experience across the board. But it's not just about money. It never has been. It is about the wider support network that sits around that family and that child. So again, we would have liked there to have been more analysis of the evidence that tells us where that support is most needed. Because we also know, as I mentioned in one of my contributions, around where that persistence in severe poverty exists, that it is predominantly in sole parent households. So if you're looking for support for children in hardship as a bill, actually the support also needs to go to those specifically to those single parent households. We know in those cases that obviously care arrangements are difficult, they're more restricted, you can't simply just take in those extra 20 hours of work without thinking about your care arrangements. And again, support with one hand with the increase of the $25, but taking away on the other by increasing those hours of work, potentially again restricting what that caregiver is able to manage in terms of their relationship with that child. So I think the title is disingenuous. It's singular in the support, singular in the sense that it's simply about income and not about that broader support network. We would also highlight again, I think, because as I've said, it's not just about income from our perspective. When we're talking about those families in most need, we make an assumption in our society that a family, particularly maybe a sole parent who's raising a child, has a support network. That is not a given. It is no longer in the case in New Zealand that you have that village, that community, or necessarily even that whānau around you. But this bill is based on that premise. It assumes someone else can pick up caregiver roles where that individual isn't able to do it because of work obligations. And so all of the policies we've always looked at around income inadequacy and poverty and deprivation have always also included what can we do to improve that support mechanism? What role can tamariki order play? What role can Plunkett play? What role can those networks play universally by being in the home, providing that contact with that family to other support agencies, to bring in that village that used to exist in raising children, but that has ebbed away? That is what true support looks like, Mr. Chair. And if we were genuinely considering a bill that was true to the name, true to the title of support for children in hardship, there would be elements of support that went beyond a single child, that would look to the network that exists around that parent, that child's family as well, Mr. Chair.
Call Stuart Nash.